Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, welcome to Club E. Our discussion today is real acquisitions of Minnesota, and no, it's not a reality TV show, at least not yet. This is the start of the 13th season of Club E, and it's been a fun ride. And where's Margaret Leto? Over here. Margaret Leto actually helped me get this up and running 13 years ago when she was working at the Minneapolis Club. So thank you, Margaret, for all the help that you provided back then. And thank you for the support that you helped make a reality with this group after all these years and all these sessions. And I appreciate the folks who are in the audience because you're the ones who make this group valuable and important. Real Acquisitions of Minnesota is a joint session between Club E and the Exit Planning Institute, otherwise known as the EPI. The moderator today is my longtime friend and cohort in a variety of businesses endeavors, Julie Keys, right here to my right. Julie is president of the local chapter of the EPI and an exit strategy consultant with her own business, Key Strategies. I'm familiar with all the companies and the experts that you're going to be hearing from shortly, and I'm confident that you'll find significant value in their comments and perspectives. Before we get to today's discussion, I'd like to thank our Club E sponsors. Irish Titan is an e-commerce and strategic digital agency. I know I have Darren Lynch here somewhere, right out here in front. Boulay CPAs and Business Advisors. I don't know. I didn't get a chance to. I got Boulay over here. Ryan, nice to see you. Oh. Somewhere else? Somewhere? Yeah. Bueller over here. Good to see you. Highland Bank, a local family-owned community bank. Any Highland folks over here? Yes. Nice to see you. Winthrop and Weinstein, a general practice law firm. We got a couple of folks. Dean to my immediate left and Gretchen up here in the front row. And then the Network Connect is a catalytic gateway for connecting investors, companies, and service providers. That is a partnership that I have with Dick Summerstead off to my immediate right. And thank you for the ongoing support of these sponsors because they are the ones who make these events a reality. A reminder to sign up online. The RSVP closes 24 hours in advance. So for those of you who send emails out, it closed and I missed it. Well, that's 24 hours. So try to get signed up 24 hours in advance. It helped the club out. Website clube.com. You can sign up for the newsletter for future events as well as join the group and the business directory. LinkedIn has a group, Club Entrepreneur Minneapolis, where we have about 2,700 people. There's a meetup group with over 2,000 Club E members. And then, as I mentioned, an email list through the Club E website. Minneapolis Club has been a co-sponsor of this event with me this whole time, and anybody who'd like to learn a little bit more about the Minneapolis Club and the benefits of membership, you can seek me out. And then, let's see, a number of events, and starting with Lessons from the Garage, which is a series of video podcasts. We have over 200 titles thus far in the library, and it's growing by the week. Think of it as kind of Netflix for business owners and entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their companies. There's handouts on the tables. I do that with Dick Summerstead at the Network Connect. And then I have a number of events that I'm going to just go through real quickly. September 17th, I'm speaking at Boss Business Owners Seminar Series on raising capital. Somebody wants to learn more about that, see me. September 18th, Club E St. Paul Grand Slam Clients. Chum Struve, where's Chum? Over here. Chum runs Club E St. Paul, and Todd Eberhardt is off to my right. Todd is the speaker of that event. September 26th, actually haven't said this publicly yet, but we're going to launch a Club E in Maple Grove, and that's going to be on September 26th, Pillars of Digital Marketing. October 3rd, I got two events, Club E right here. Anybody familiar with the Inspire Medical Systems story? Spin out of Medtronic, raised some angel and venture money, grew the company, went public, and their CFO will be telling us about their story. October 3rd is the 5th annual e-commerce forum. Darren Lynch of Irish Titan can tell you more about that if you'd like to learn more. There's flyers on the tables for those of you who'd like to do or learn more about that. Club E has also co-sponsored that along with Irish Titan and other organizations. That's a great event if you're looking to learn more about e-commerce. October 10th is the third annual Owners Forum. That's co-sponsored with Club E and the EPI. Julie will also tell you a little bit about that. That's October 10th. Owners Forum, third annual Owners Forum, October 16th, back to St. Paul. Club E, October 30th, back here for Minneapolis. And there's just a lot of stuff happening. I know if anybody went to last week's lunch conversation, we were talking about ESOPs, which kind of fits into what we might talk a little bit about today. We're going to cover ESOPs at Club E November 8th. So that's a lot in a short period of time. Julie and I have had an opportunity to work together on a number of different things. I know you're going to enjoy the panel that she's put together with our wonderful panel of experts here. It's a pleasure and an honor to have Julie Keys and the EPI share the stage in the event with us. So please welcome Julie Keys.
Well, what a nice introduction. Thank you, Rick. The feeling is mutual, actually. It really is fun to work with like-minded people. And in the work that I do as an exit planner, like-mindedness and collaboration is the key to a successful transition. And so today, we're going to be talking about a form of transition, and that's acquisition, right? Bringing in a new service offering or a new product, a new company, talking about what that looks like from the inside and the outside. And to get us started, I'm just going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their story so that you can get to know them a little bit personally and professionally. And Dean, I would like to start with you. Dean, again, is an M&A attorney with Winthrop and Weinstein.
So my name is Dean Willer. I'm a 15-year lawyer at Winthrop and Weinstein, so I have the dubious distinction of having the least interesting things to say today. However, I'm a lawyer, so I like to hear myself speak. I'll do my best to keep my story short. Our law firm primarily represents closely held businesses and private equity funds in my group, a series of transactions, from acquiring other businesses to selling themselves to raising capital. I've been doing it for 15 years. My colleagues a lot longer than I have, so they're quite a bit smarter than I am. But we have, we primarily focus on companies where they're closely held, so we get to know the CFO, get to know the CEO, get to understand their business, which has been a lot of fun. You get to learn a lot. You get to be a valued add to the client as opposed to a vendor, which is fantastic. I've spoken in a number of these, and I really appreciate Julie and Rick putting them on. I know it's a lot of thankless work.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here, so thanks so much. John Long, who is the founder and co-chairman of Aviante.
Great, and how you pronounce Aviante, just grab a beer and pretend you're doing cheers. Aviante. All right, great. So the Aviante is a staffing software, so if you know staffing companies who provide software to run them, I founded it back in 2005. We sold to private equity in 2014. I retained my ownership through that, so I can talk about that experience with picking the right private equity. Since then, we did four other acquisitions, both from a technical point of view as well as the zombies, where it's just a customer base.
Thank you. Pat Rowan, National Theater for Children.
Yeah, Patrick Rowan, National Theater for Children, COO of NTC. So we actually work with Julie and part of the exit planning strategy for our owners. I've been with NTC for 21 years, or in other words, since Eddie here was in 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that. I have a background in theater, acting, directing, management, customer service. I also come from a long line of educators, which fits in perfectly for our business at NTC because we are an educational content provider for sponsors. For students in grades K through 12 all across the country. We use the magic of live interactive theater to provide content for these students, and we cover important topics that they don't necessarily get in the classroom. Things like energy efficiency, electrical safety, water conservation, natural gas safety, emergency preparedness is one of our newer ones, and So anyway, it's my responsibility to make sure that the day-to-day operations of NTC go smoothly with our theater production department, our print and digital department, our school marketing, product development, and IT services. And And I suppose we're here today kind of representing the spectrum of acquisition on kind of the newly into the process of acquisition.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Eddie Eames, who is Chief Marketing Officer of NTC.
Pat kind of just said a lot of stuff, but I'm Eddie Eames, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at National Leader for Children. Just to go into a little bit of what we do, we are headquartered here in Minneapolis, but we are virtually in every state nationally doing theater programs in schools on behalf of organizations. So as an example, Centerpoint Energy hires us to go to their service territory to teach kids all throughout their area about energy conservation or natural gas. We started off, and it's all taught through live theater. So the theater is what kicks off the event, but as Pat mentioned, we have games and curriculum that go into the classroom, and it's all sponsored or branded by the sponsor. I've been with NTC since 2009. I currently live in St. Louis Park and have a 6-month-old daughter that just started daycare, so we eagerly await her first cold.
Isn't that the truth? Jeff Perubkin, President of Master Supplements.
Hello. I'm here to represent for Master Supplements, and was invited because we had just, we'd been in the process and actually just closed our first merger and acquisition on Friday, so I'm bringing tales of horror from the front lines. Just kidding. It was a great experience, and I think for the company as a whole. And we had come to work with Julia originally on kind of going from the first generation to the second generation of a family-owned business, and working on that succession. And that was one kind of track and sort of bled into this, but really growing through acquisition. It started as an idea in a board meeting, just easier to grow, by buying versus building. And I saw, on Rick's card here, the phrase "grow or die," and that was kind of a mentality that we had, that we couldn't tread water, for long, so we had to get creative. And that process in 2017 led to a couple of letters of intent that for various reasons didn't pan out. And then, and that was kind of where we were proactively looking, and then just recently with the acquisition that went through, it kind of found us. So there was a little serendipity there, and it was just a really sweet deal as far as the boxes kept getting checked off. The due diligence process was, I think, grueling from what I've heard from people who've done this a lot more for a deal this size, but got through that, and then kind of the legal phase, and right now we're in the heart of the integration, like literally like this week. So yeah, that's our story for Master Supplements.
Thanks, Jeff. I know your hair's still on fire, but I appreciate you being here. It's really great. Yeah. So, Dean, I'd like to start with you with a question, please. So, what would you say are some of the common pitfalls that you see when you're advising your clients in M&A transactions? And if it's possible to remedy, what does that look like?
Sure. I'll probably give you two. One will be nakedly self-serving. So, in my opinion, it's a lot to deal with expectations. What do you go into? What is one side's party's expectations? What's the other's, right? And so, I would say one of the first pitfalls is wanting it too badly, or convincing yourself you need it too badly. That puts you in a position where your leverage goes down precipitously, even though it may not necessarily be something you need to have happen. If people get too committed to realize that if I don't do this, I will not get X, I will, we won't be around in 5 years. And sometimes it happens, right? But and a lot of times deals are very important, and frequently they're very important. But sometimes if people are too emotionally invested in the transaction, it starts to show. They start, giving away a lot of things, and then all of a sudden the other side starts to, expect that, hey, anytime I ask for something, you're gonna cave. Which actually can create stresses on a deal you wouldn't otherwise anticipate, right? Where a lot of times we deal with Minnesota companies, everybody's very Minnesota nice, and they want to cooperate and get along. Every once in a while, a well-placed no or something more stern will go a long way, particularly earlier on in a deal. If you have some lines, if you're willing to make it clear what your expectations are and be somewhat assertive, I would say a lot of times it helps the deal go more smoothly. I would say the other pitfall that you run into, and this is the self-serving one, is a lot of times people, I don't really want to get advisors involved until I'm further into the deal, until I'm further into the transaction, right? It's a relatively modest cost to get your accountant, your attorney, your financial advisor, other people who are in your network, even your directors involved early. But the benefits can be significant because if you make, there's a lot of conversations around like deal structure and price and how things are going to get funded and paid for that, you don't intuitively think, well, I need my accountant, I need my lawyer, I need my, insurance broker, these kind of things involved. But if they're involved, you can set expectations early by getting some of those things right. It's hard to go back later and change some decisions that end up in the letter of intent. But if somebody gives me a letter of intent and we're running this now that they kind of got pre-negotiated and there's some elements of like an earn-out which are just going to be really tough to hit, right? And yeah, we can change them maybe, but it requires a lot more work to try to fix some of this stuff so that the client can actually receive their expectations. So that would be probably the two things I would focus on what your expectations are, what the other side's expectations are, and set those early so that as the deal goes through, you're more likely to get to the exit that you look for.
Thank you. Excellent comments. So, John, I have one for you. What would you say were the best and worst parts of selling to private equity?
Fantastic. Selling to private equity, so we did that 5 years ago. It's a process. Just understand that right up front. Not all private equity firms are created alike. It seems like there's a tons of them. So we went through a process where we interviewed, and I highly recommend interview the actual private equity companies. I interviewed probably 15 of them as we went through. So things that we'll watch out for, one is the chairman, get to know the chairman's side of it. That helps out immensely in actually closing the deal. Plus going forward, you got to look at how is it going to be on your relationship going forward. So I've been with this guy, I've had him up to my cabin. We've been friends for the 5.5 years that they've owned us as well. If you don't care about your baby, you don't care about hanging on with the private equity afterwards, feel free to go with the highest enterprise value and go that way. That's great. But if you do care about those things, there's so much more than just the enterprise value, and it's worth digging into those itself. I would look at the integrity of the private equity company. There's tons of them out there that are only in it for the governance side of it and trying to get the dollar part. And I would strongly emphasize going with the ones that want to build your business as opposed to just, riding your butt constantly forward. It's important to also remember you can't beat private equity. They invested a lot of money into you. There are boards. It is a full-on deal, budgets, spreadsheets, that whole deal. And so I went through a period where I tried to just maintain my rawness, and it just doesn't work. Just accept what it is itself. I think the last thing is just doing the reference checks in the interview process itself. And this is where you will find the integrity of the private equity by calling up on people that have exited from them, people that they've done deals with, and how they actually did the structure. So again, I echo what Dean had said. There's so many little things constantly. If you don't have a relationship with that other side of it, you're just going to get blown out, right? And so the notion is just really treat it as almost like you're interviewing your next CFO or whatever.
Sounds like you could write a book on that. Maybe that's what's coming. Thank you. So Pat, tell us about how an acquisition is part of the strategic planning process for NTC. Like, why did you guys decide to acquire, and how does that fit in?
Sure. So we're a 40-plus-year-old company, and we are, I guess, like Jeff, going through first-generation owners transitioning to second-generation owner, and so we started looking at acquisition as a way to grow through just purchase as opposed to build, and we started doing that. We started looking about 3 years ago or so. We kind of serendipity. One of our vendor partners said, "Hey, I'm looking at retiring," and we thought, "Oh, we work with them. They're in the same industry. She wants to get out. That it seems like an easy deal." But unsuccessfully, we thought it could be an alternative revenue source since and open up new opportunities. But as that played out, we began to, really without intention, kind of just searching and just kind of going, checking out through our own networks and thinking about other companies to buy. But then we realized about a year ago, then we said, okay, enough with this unintentionality. We decided it took up more time and energy to do that without intention. So we said, okay, we're going to make this a part of our strategic plan. And because four failed attempts, made us discover that it took up a lot of resources and time. So we made the strategic decision to work with a local broker here at Black Torch to help us identify the targets, to help us with the financial analysis, and get us closer to LOI and close a deal at some point.
Excellent, thank you. So Eddie, I'd like to have you comment on the seller's competency and how that might have affected a future acquisition from other experiences you've had.
Sure. So, about this time last year, we were engaged with talks with another theater group. They do educational theater like us, but different model. And we had an LOI signed, and so our executive team decided to go out there and kind of do a culture audit and see what it was all about out there. And part of the agreement was the seller was going to stay on for about 12 months to kind of train us on how the process works for their operation. And as we were out there, it became very clear that she did not want to stay on board. She was going to be more painful than helpful. And the leadership that would be working with them, it was clear it was going to be toxic. And we met their production people, and it turns out that the main person was going to be starting part-time, and they had some other employees out there that were thinking about going back to grad school. So it just, we needed to have some people retain some of these people so we could run the operation. And we kind of sat down and we put our heads together and said, we aren't going to move forward with this because it's just going to be more painful than helpful. And it's kind of interesting to think about that. I mean, we had an LOI, we had a price. Sometimes you think that's the hardest part, and that was all agreed upon. But once we really got the culture and figured out what it would take to operate this other theater business was just not for us, and we had to make that decision. It was a tough decision, but we felt it was the right one.
Thank you. Yeah, so the person he's referring to that was the difficult woman who started and ran this company was dubbed Cruella DeVille. So I always thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, you got to add a little humor into these things, don't you? All right, so Jeff, tell us, you're just right out, right? You're just right out of the closing, and you've learned a lot. And so maybe you could just share with us, how that went and what's next.
Yeah, well, I think the next is the fun part. It's the part we've been waiting for. After two failed letters of intent that just didn't work out again for a variety of reasons. One, I was excited to be in that due diligence phase because it meant we were fine. We had a countersigned LOI. It was time to really get into it. So and we also, to kind of touch on a few points, we chose a broker, also Black Torch, which very interesting to hear that. But that helped us from a very at an early point, and we spent a lot of time proactively searching and looked at a lot of different companies, and that led to the two letters of intent. And Tony of Black Torch, and also this other piece where the Tenica, where there was Kathy Vessels, which kind of interfaced more directly with the banks when it came to that. Having those two pieces in place and having some experience with them, even in the failed letters of intent, were still important stepping stones to where we needed to get to. For us, the due diligence process was a mix of, surrounding ourselves with really good, and or at an early on point, our attorneys at Meserly and Kramer were imperative, but then so were, Boulay. Thank you, Ryan. Nice to see you. and a lot of others along the way. But also, I would emphasizing that due diligence. It also came down to having your internal team all on board, because there was some kind of some big things that it took our staff and our CPA and our vice president of manufacturing. So we're a probiotic company, and we had bought an enzyme company. So we're in the world of the FDA and Department of Agriculture and regulatory side. So a lot of things to take into consideration there. But June 30th, we had to walk away from the deal because we had given our best offer, and the seller, with our due diligence findings, I think had needed some time to sort of come to grips that this business of his wasn't quite what he thought it was, and his 2018 numbers weren't quite what he thought they were. So we walked away, and I mean, as over the 4th of July, a long weekend, sort of some soul searching, came back and told the staff that no time for whining about it. We're full speed ahead, and initiated a couple other campaigns and things that we were doing. And couple weeks after that, into July, I got the phone call, and it was the seller. And before I even took the phone call, I mean, I knew exactly what he was going to say. And at the time, he was going to try to retain the company and try to get the value up and the profitability up, so the value equations looked a little better in his favor. But I think he realized after 2 weeks that he didn't want this headache. So he came back, and at that point we were then out of the due diligence phase into the legal kind of back and forth. But for the most part, at that point, everyone was in it, and the dominoes just started falling and led up to the closing on Friday, which was extremely intense. I mean, I did not expect the amount of red line edits, on the day of closing. We had done our bank closing piece, which was, amazing, and went really smooth on the Thursday before, there was a lot to that. But we had an 8-page licensing agreement that somehow had slipped, by for the first 7 months of this process. So had to dive into it, but was able to kind of meet the wire transfer deadline at 3 p.m. And now, as Julie said, we are in the thick of it, and it's truly the fun part. I mean, just the energy that comes along with the acquisition. You kind of get bit by the deal bug, but it definitely took a network and a lot of work, and some leadership, and a kind of a failure is not an option mentality ultimately to get through just that diligence and some of those, just the struggles of keeping things moving.
Well, you did a good job. You hung in there, so congratulations, by the way. Yeah, thanks for being here. So, Dean, I have another question for you. So, I'm sure that you could probably fill the entire day with stories, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly of M&A transactions. But, yeah, well, we don't have all day, but maybe next time. I think Rick might be bringing out the vaudeville cane pretty soon. So, but could you just share a recent story that comes to mind? And one that was actually really successful, and then if you could just share with us a few reasons why it was really successful.
Sure. So, I mean, I've heard a lot of times people say the majority of transactions are unsuccessful, et cetera, and I've never understood why that stat is out there. I mean, maybe it's more tied to some public deals or something, but I would say that the vast majority of the time that we've gone through transaction, if it's the irony of your deal is this is where it matters. What you do now, you're not done, right? No. It's the transition it's the integration. That's where you really add value, and you test out your assumptions, but if you don't get this part right, say la vie, right? But that's the funny part about what we do is we kind of sign. There's not as much going on, but after all said and done, I mean that's where the real work begins. And so we have seen some very. It's kind of a funny thing. Usually people think of litigators as this fast-paced lifestyle, but M&A stuff throws you right in the middle of the. I had a client call me up on the Friday before, 2 days before closing, to tell me that somebody was murdered at their office. I didn't even do with it. I didn't. Probably the success story that I'd share is we had one client that is probably, and it's a testament, I guess, to actually some value that lawyers may add somewhere in the world. But we had held our guns on some language in the purchase agreement about taxes, and we knew that the sellers had some tax issues going into the deal, and that it seemed like a civil matter. But because we held to our guns, I got a phone call from the seller's lawyer that said, we said that was a civil matter. It wasn't. It was ultimately turned into a criminal matter, and we bought the company from the sellers, and the sellers basically had to sell because they were on the wrong end of the IRS and the Department of Justice. They ended up becoming housed by the federal government for a while, giving clothing and meals and a nice little work camp. And we bought their company. They did it, and we bought it with parts cash, part stock. Held on to it. Did a lot of the integration things that I just referenced. Turned the keys. Did some add-on acquisitions. And probably it's the 7 years later, sold the whole thing for I think 8 or 9x of what we paid for it originally. The sellers ended up doing okay because they got some cash in the beginning, which they used to compensate Uncle Sam for monies they otherwise owed him, and then did okay on the back end because they ended up with some of the stock in ours that we ended up selling. So they could not have ended up in a better position. Thankfully, they were not my clients. My clients are fantastic, law-abiding people, all situations. But it worked out fantastic. I'll share one little piece of this, and I do acknowledge that I don't have all day. And other stories other transactions we've been involved in. We've seen some really successful roll-up strategies where 1 + 1 = 3, where people add businesses, and they're not always adding them and then cutting 3/4 of the staff. I mean, a lot of times they'll bring people in, they'll empower them. A lot of times our private equity owners of our clients or our clients that are private equity funds that buy companies. Once you get some extra cash, you can start doing these acquisitions. You can start investing in some places that you want to invest in, and they can be real solid value adds, right? Which is why I think I'm glad you said what you said about making sure you get the right group. Because you get the right group, they believe in you. They're going to invest in what you're doing. A few years later, you start doing some add-on acquisitions, some bolt-on acquisitions, and you have a much larger company that is putting resources really where they need to go. Just had a call literally before this meeting, exactly the same situation. So if you get the right circumstance, if you can find the right partners, whether they be private equity, which is a great resource, or high net worth individuals, or you're just able to generate it from yourself, and you can start these roll-ups. The opportunities can really be endless if you're smart and thoughtful about how you approach it.
Thank you. I agree 100%. In fact, I think that there's going to be a lot more opportunity coming up for those roll-up and bolt-on opportunities for sure. So thanks for your comments. So John, in your opinion, what would you say are 2 or 3 things that you'd advise business owners to know about or do if they're considering a sale to private equity?
Very good. First off, we should lobby over here to he's the head of all of Minnesota State Colleges, right? So we can get a class going in there. So what I think that would be kind of fun to have. Talk about this. So 2 to 3 things that I would do. So we did 3 the bolt-ons. So we did 3 that are zombies, right? That's you buy just the customer list and you throw away the technology, and then 1 that's a technology play. All of these are very much a culture-based thing that you need to focus on. So of the 3 zombies, first is really focus in on how important the zombie management is on the relationship to keep the customer. So we did 1 where we kind of blew that off, and they're like, hey, everybody wants this cool new shiny object stuff, and it didn't go near as well. Back to the next 2, we really focused in on that leadership team, and they really helped on getting everybody transferred over. So don't underestimate that relationship side of the existing people itself. Do the due diligence on the customer base itself. If the customer base is not paying a lot of money, the odds of them starting to upcharge and getting pay you a lot of money for the privilege to work with you is problematic, right? So minimize that side of it, because they are still with the zombie for a reason. And from a tech, I don't know what's interest to you guys or not, but from a tech point of view, people want to go to the new stuff. If they're used to the flip phone, my dad loves the flip phone. I got him a iPhone a couple weeks back, hates it. Right? So it's just that mentality, just kind of focusing. Then on the tech play, if there's one thing that's on, it is that culture side of it, because we have now 2 offices, 1 here, 1 in San Francisco. We need those players. That is the one that they know everything in it. And you've got to overboard emphasize how much value they bring. Because if you believe you're the dog and they're the tail, even though you're substantially larger, it's just a recipe for disaster on that side of it. You really need to embrace them, bring into the culture itself. Many times it actually has a better culture than yours did, and true in our situation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good point. Good point. So, Pat, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned in these experiences of trying to acquire other companies?
Question. I guess it may be cliche, but I guess patience. Um, we have not had the success yet that Dean was talking about, and like Eddie said, we've dealt with owners who are emotional and irrational and have overvalued their companies. Owners who have said, well, we've trying to come to a price, and they've said, well, yeah, but in 5 years it's going to be even more. So we can't buy in the future. So it has been patience, not getting too excited, because there's some opportunities that we thought, man, this is gonna be great. Can't wait to start integrating and doing our due diligence, and then it doesn't work out, and then you kind of get disappointed. So not getting too high, not getting too low. Um, what else? I guess we also just recently, as of yesterday, adjusted our strategy. And decided, we're no longer going to go to companies that aren't represented, because it just seemed like companies weren't, they're just not ready to sell. So now we are going to try for a higher target revenue, and go to only companies who are only represented to try to get that success rate up higher.
I think that's a good strategy. It's a good new strategy. I'm in. Okay, so Eddie, how did you communicate with your staff the fact that you were thinking about acquiring another business? What was your process? How did you do that? Because a lot of owners try to keep those things a secret, and that's not always a smart thing to do.
Yep. So we run what we call an all staff every quarter, which is all of our employees meet, and we kind of have the departments represent, talk about something they've accomplished or something they're going to be tackling the next quarter, and everybody kind of shares. We share where the company's at revenue wise with everybody. That's a choice that our leadership has made, and it was at this meeting the executive staff kind of gets up in front, and we are open for Q&A for anybody in the company, and we had told them that we were looking at this other group and that we had an LOI signed, and asked anybody that wants to be involved, come see us. Open door policy to talk about it, and so we just kind of presented it to them there, and then kind of as Pat was mentioning with the don't get too high, we had a lot of people that were excited about this, and went and researched, and we actually had people go to this other group's shows and see it and see how they could put their stamp and improve it. And so that's what made it somewhat disappointing when this fell apart with the culture toxic part of it. When we went and visited, we had staff that were kind of upset that they couldn't tackle this new opportunity. But we, as the leadership, we told the company about it and had them just kind of ask questions when they came about it, but that's how we introduced it.
Excellent, thank you. So let's see, Jeff, your due diligence process, you've been through it a few times. Maybe 2 or 3 things that you've learned through that experience.
All right. I think we learned something along the way, hopefully, get us ready for the next M&A deal here, which we're anxious to do, but we got to finish the integration of this one first. So first things first. But I think there's a couple of things. You got to have a leader, some sort of quarterback within the company. If it's not the owner themselves, then somebody, because you're taking some vital staff members and employees and working with a lot of outside consultants and people who build the support system. But not that I ever had this outlook, but I would, you just got to be careful of kind of having everything, done for you, especially when you work with such great, professionals. You kind of think like, okay, they've done this before. But it really falls on the company, and the part where we're at now, the staff that you have and the leadership that's going to help quarterback this thing and drive down the field and, score a touchdown is who's going to be there for that integration period. And not that you don't have, other support, on an ongoing basis, but definitely a little bit of a drop off where you just have to be prepared. And through the due diligence process too, that was a big part of it. Making sure that all these different limbs are moving in the same direction, and being organized. The ability to take really complex things and situations and emotions, and taking that out of it and simplifying these very complex processes. Um, yeah, I think that was the big one, that you need to have somebody to kind of coalesce the whole thing, and that you don't want to just have that person, because it really does take a team to get you there, but you got to have somebody also kind of driving the bus.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my next question is a question for all of you, and it's kind of a twofold question. So first of all, I'd like to have you touch on the importance of culture, how to bring two cultures together, like what are some of the best practices for doing that, and then to address when you have leadership in two different companies, how do you best assess their highest and best use, right? Right people, right seats kind of concept. So I'd like to have you each, from your own perspective, just address how you've worked that through or thought about it or planned it. And then Dean, of course, you have many stories, so I'll just start with you.
So, like I said, we don't get as involved in the transition, the real critical important stuff, as I'm sure I'd like to do, but probably people don't want to pay me to do. But I do think that the more on the diligence side you can spend time with the people that you're going to be working with, the better, right? If you're retaining the CEO, if you're bringing on some operational people, if you're bringing on salespeople, the more touch points they can have with your organization, there's always going to be tension between, I don't want everybody in my organization to know we're doing this. They don't want everybody in their organization to know we're going to be doing this, and then the desire to get to know people, right? But if you have a tough if the culture doesn't align, if the way you're set up and the way they're setting up is not at least notionally consistent, you're gonna have a lot of problems, and you do run into that periodically, where people they're not used to working the way we expect them to work, right? Obviously, PE firms deal with this a lot, but they spend a lot of time looking into the cultures of the organizations. I've seen them go from have personality assessments to psychological assessments, all the way down to less, depending on how much they dig into it. But particularly if you're doing a strategic acquisition like you guys did, where it's your organization and their organization, that culture becomes even more critical, because you're going to be meshing some people from very different families.
Right. Perfect.
So
Thank you.
we have so many backgrounds here, and so I tried to be something that's useful to so many different backgrounds itself. So how about this one? Ask yourself, when you just did a merger of companies, when will you lose most of their people? Right away, first month, next period, transition. Mentally, I'm sorry? Within the 6 months? So where I would submit to you is the first couple, right away, you might lose a little bit, but it's actually a double bump. So you lose a little bit, then it transitions, and right around the 6 month part, 4 to 6 months, 3 to 6 months, that's actually when you lose most of your people. And it's going to be on that mid-management layer, because you'll have taken care of the exec team as well. You've been focused on there. You'll have forgotten about the mid-management layer, the people that were the informal leaders. By the way, this is what you shouldn't do. This is what you will do. You forget about those people, and those people, that's going to trickle off, and then all those little followers that that mid-management are going to follow us up. So just think about that double bump, and if you mentally think about 3, 4, 6 months is when those people are lose, work your ass off to not let that happen. Fair?
Thank you. Excellent.
Well, we haven't done it yet, but when we do, our approach, I guess, for cultural integration, it really starts with our company values. And so we've kind of approached every opportunity as going, well, whether we're adding on another staff, or we're, just taking key people and then letting everyone else go. What we've decided is that it really comes down to our values. And so aligning, things that include honesty and keeping long-term relationships and doing things beneficial to all concerned. If we can instill those with whoever else, or align that with whoever else we're buying, it's got to start there, and then from there, then we can make those management decisions, and with their key people. So that's how we're going.
Perfect. Thank you. Eddie.
Yeah, I think I spoke a little bit on this earlier with our experience, but we took in the thought of culture with the group we were going to acquire, and it wasn't a match, so we had to pull out. But I guess I would just say really take the time, and look into it when you're looking at acquiring. Don't kind of skip it over, or don't try to think you can mend it after a deal's already made. Because it really is important. It's important for all your employees. You don't want to have fear, and really, yeah. So that's just kind of, with us being in this process, I would just stress that really take the time to take that into account.
Thank you.
Julie, I still remember at the meeting that we were at around the conference table when you said, well, have you thought about the culture? And I said, this is after we had looked at a couple, and just to reiterate that, I think you just, if you're in it yourself, you got to take it seriously and really take the time to look at it. If you're advising people who are doing it, remind them to look at it, because you get caught up in the numbers and all the other pieces on the game board, and you really do got to look at the core values. To minimize, the some of the fall off, the more of a culture fit that you're going to have in the beginning. I think, not that you won't have issues, but it's just going to make things a little bit easier. So, and we had gotten lucky, and the culture, we had that in mind for even the failed letters of intent. And I'd say, for those companies, there was still, our mutual respect and some shared, values and things. But the numbers got to match too. But just that culture piece was critical, and we got really lucky with this one where both companies had kind of both in the dietary supplement world very highly efficacious products, and similar mentalities in who and how we sold and how the formulations were derived. So yeah, just kind of to reiterate what everyone's saying, it really matters. So just something that has to be taken into consideration early on.
Perfect. Thanks. Rick, do we have time for a question or two? Yes. Okay. So, opening it up to you guys. Who has a question?
Well, when do you think it's time to get the employees, when you're doing it through the acquirer of another company or the seller, involved in the process and letting them know that something is happening? Obviously, the rumor mill is still what starts building. When do you think it's time to let people know without compromising the deal?
Go to this guy for the main. For me, when I sold, I did not have the employees involved in that side of it. It was I had the key directors and whatnot, but that was more of a decision of the founders and for mine. So we did not hide it. We were big enough at the time that we could have people coming in south. When we're buying the new companies, almost of the four, all four of them did not tell the main staff. All four of them were that director level and above side of it. I don't know that that's good practice, but all four of them had that mentality.
Yeah, I've seen it both ways. I've seen sellers who want to play it really close to the vest. There's two inherent risks in my opinion with that. Is one, people find out a lot, right? I mean, from leaving something on a printer to seeing an admin seeing an email to and you can be clever and think you're really clever, but it's really high. I mean, try to hide anything from your spouse for more than 3 months, you'll fail. Same thing here, right? So to the extent possible, I think it's they're more, in my opinion, it's more effective, particularly on the buy side, if people don't show up to work Monday and there's somebody in the suit standing in front and say, "Welcome to our new organization," right? If people can acclimate, you probably lose less of that first bump, and maybe even less of the second one, possibly. But if the seller is really insistent on not letting people know, I do think you need to think about what the circle looks like, right? The circle, you may have to insist that it's not just the CEO and the CFO who's in the loop, right? You may want to go down maybe a little further, maybe even to some of those people in middle management. I mean, if nothing else for the culture reasons we just talked about, to see if they're going to work, right? I mean, if somebody controls 60% of the sales of an organization, you may want to talk to that person before you sell, right? Before you buy them, right? And so figure out why that person stays and how can you make sure they stay. And so, my own 2 cents is the sooner the further on the buy side, the more you can get in there, the better. On the sell side, you obviously have to be thoughtful about it. But I guess I haven't seen a lot of situations where they told a lot of people and then a deal didn't go, and then all of a sudden, there's a institutional problem. I mean, that might be the case, but I think a lot of times, most of the time people are adults and mature, and if they have information, they're able to process it and understand, and they can appreciate why a deal might not have gone forward. But so my own 2 cents is that if you're careful about messaging and thoughtful about who you engage with, it's less of a big deal if you bring more people in earlier.
Thank you. Excellent. Mark?
Jeff, the seller that you were buying from thought his business was worth more than you did. What were the things that he was surprised at that you discounted, broadly speaking?
In this case, it was really just one specific, and I mean, it had a pretty big impact, but it was just one thing. In our failed letters of intent, there was a difference, more like maybe what you guys have seen, where there's just this idea of what their value is from the seller, and we didn't have that. Wasn't the case here. We were all on the same page, but it came down. We acquired 22 new products, and a portion of those were held on consignment, and it came down to sort of a factoring error in how they were doing it, where the funds were coming in and coming out, but how they were processing the inventory and the cost of goods weren't being, accounted for correctly. And it wasn't, all that blatant. It took a little bit of kind of, doubling back to go, wait a minute, there's definitely something not right here. But I mean, we were very close to, overexposing, and being at risk there. That was really it. It was, we kind of found that and, had to go back to him and say, hey, this is what's going on. And there's the culture fit. We were on really good terms, but there was definitely, it took him some time, I think, to go back and go, wow, well, these guys are right. And all I can say there is, we kept the emotion out of it. We stuck to the facts and tried to be nice, just being nice throughout the process. Minnesota nice, but not just to be naive, just because you can get things done, and just being direct, sticking to the facts, and ultimately, framing it and relaying it in such a way that it's almost impossible to argue with, because it's like, no, I mean, you take a look, you tell us. And so we knew we kind of had, the right call, and ultimately that's why up until the very end, we were prepared and did, walk away from it, even though we knew, we'd be hard pressed to see another deal where all the boxes checked off like this one. So that was pretty bittersweet for a time there, but that was really it. It was just a clerical error. So I think it surprised him to see, like, whoa, I didn't have that in profit last year, and this, and he kind of turned on some of his salespeople and started kind of pointing fingers, and wasn't really, their fault. So yeah, that was, our story with this one.
Two, I know it's directed to me, but 2 things just to watch out. Biggest gotcha is deferred sales tax, because people aren't doing sales tax right. You get bought out and whatnot, and they come back for you. We got nailed on that part. And the next one is, if you don't know the term net working capital, learn exactly what the frick that means, because that one cost me a couple $100,000 out of my pocket as well. So net working capital.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So really quick, I know we're a couple minutes over. I just wanted to mention a couple things that are at your tables. One thing, I think there's just one copy at each table. This is the event that Rick referenced called the Owners Forum. That's on October 10th. You are all cordially invited to attend this event. If you are an advisor, you are required to bring a business owner with you, because we don't want the audience to be imbalanced. But this is our 3rd annual, and it's going to be the best ever. The vast majority of the speakers at this event will be business owners sharing their stories of transition. So I think it's going to be a great event, and I'm looking forward to doing that with Rick. And then the save the date, is the Twin Cities Metro Area Chapter, just next couple of meetings and titles of the meetings. And of course, the Owners Forum is on here. So if you're an advisor or business owner, you're always welcome. You don't have to be a member to attend. And we're just about making sure that we can educate people on the process of exit planning and understand the importance of doing it in a collaborative manner so that everybody wins. And I would just like to wholeheartedly thank all of you for being here and sharing your stories. We could have listened for a lot longer, but we don't have the time to do that. And especially to Eddie and Pat and Jeff, you guys are in the trenches and you're doing a great job, and I'm just really, really proud of you. I'm honored to be your advisor. So thank you so much. Rick?